In this lesson, we're going to go over how to solve a quadratic equation using square roots instead of having to factor. Because in this case, you do not need to factor because you don't have that much information to go off of. Usually, you have some term that's being squared, or some variable being squared, and it equals some other number. So if I have x squared equals 1, I use the inverse to get rid of the squared, so I can figure out what x is. What I do to one side, I have to do the other side, so I'm taking the square root of 1. However, the square root of 1, a lot of people will say is 1. But it's not. It's not just 1, I should say. It's 1 and negative 1, technically. When you take the square root of something, you're going to have a negative or a positive answer. Because the square root of 1 could be 1, because 1 times 1 is 1. Or it could be negative 1, because negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. So in this case, this is how I get my two separate answers. I get x equals 1 or x equals negative 1. Both is what I have to put down as my answer. Let's look at another example. In this case, we have z squared equals 3. Now in this case again, we're going to take the square root. But notice you can't square root 3 easily. It doesn't work. So instead of trying to write a reduced decimal or simple or a rounded decimal, we're just going to simply write the square root and simple in our answer. So remember, it could be a positive or a negative answer technically. So I'm going to write z equals square root of 3 or z equals negative square root of 3. Remember, it's a positive or negative answer when you're using square root. Let's go ahead and do another step, or do another question. In number 3, you're going to notice that I'm going to have two terms on the left-hand side. Z squared minus 26. And that's going to equal negative 23. In this case, remember the first step is you just want to get z squared by itself, the variable by itself. So I'm going to do the inverse properties and I'm going to add 26 to both sides. That gives me z squared equals 3. Now if you notice, 3 looks exactly like number 2. So instead of redoing it and say, okay, square root of 3 plus or minus square root of 3, I'm just going to tell you the answer is z equals square root of 3 or z equals negative square root of 3. Now number 4 is going to be a unique type of problem. We're going to do the exact same thing we did in number 3 in the beginning, because again, it has two terms on the left-hand side. It has an additional term next to the variable, the term of the variable. In this case, we have y squared plus 35, and that equals 19. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 35 from both sides. And what you're going to notice is that I'm going to have y squared equal to a negative 16. But that's a problem. So if I take the square root of negative 16, you're going to be like, wait, a negative times a negative is a positive times a positive is a positive. There's no way to get a negative 16 when I take the square root. In fact, most calculators, if you put it in, it's going to say error. So this is when we're going to learn a new variable, a new term, and it's called I. It's called imaginary. An imaginary number is the square root of negative 1. And in this case, you know that the square root of negative 16 is the same as the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 16. So if I represents the square root of negative 1, I'm going to put an I there. And then the square root of 16 could be a positive or negative 4 as well. So my answer to this part would be 4i. I would leave I there. I is just the square root of -1. So when I write my final answer, I would do y equals 4i or y equals -4i. That's a new thing for us, those i's. For most of you guys, this is the first time you ever heard of an imaginary number. Because like I said, this is more theoretical math. Abstract math is when you have an I. Prior to this, you've always been able to work with the real number system, it's called. We're going to go ahead and do one more problem. Question number 5. This time we have 81u squared equals -1. So again, I need to get the u by itself. So to get the u by itself, I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by 81. When I do that, I got u squared equals -1 over 81. The next step is to get u by itself, so I'm going to take the square root of both sides. When I do that, you're going to realize I have again a negative in the square root. So that is equivalent to saying square root of -1 times the square root of 1 over 81. Now remember that -1 is I, so I do I and whatever the square root of 1 over 81 is. So let's review how to square root a fraction. Whenever fraction, you simply square root the top and you square root the bottom. That's all you have to do. The square root of 1 is 1, the square root of 81 is 9, so my answer is 1 over 9. Now remember, I have to have a positive and negative one of these, so I'm going to do 19i or -19i. And that's my final answer. Not the easiest topic, just because you have to remember imaginary numbers and you have to know how to square root and how to solve equations. But it's doable.